Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who is also a member of the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China Central Committee, says there has been some improvement in ties with the United States since the two presidents met last year. But Washington's misconceptions about China continue, and the promises have not been fulfilled. Meanwhile, Wang Yi announced the extension of visa-free travel treatment to more European countries. So how is China dealing with the hotspot issues like Ukraine and Gaza crises? How will China handle U.S. containment to avoid conflicts and confrontations between the two major countries, which he says are unimaginable? And above all, how does China play a role of peace in a conflict-ridden world? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute, and Jorge Heine, former Chilean Ambassador to China, Zhou Bo, Senior Fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy of Tsinghua University, and Professor Rosario Malindog-Uy, Director and the Vice President for External Affairs of the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. Well, welcome to Dialogue. We'll start with our guest in the studio, and if you have a brief review of the Chinese diplomacy in 2023, last year. So how much has been achieved, or what are the top, achievement you have in your mind?
Well, obviously, the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, that was completely unlooked for. China was working for many, many years in the background. And what's interesting about it is that China doesn't sit there and make a lot of noise and demand that you do this and you do that. What they did is merely set the table and let the two parties come together and acted as an honest broker. And this is so important in these days because trust is the major deficit that is missing from diplomacy today. So China's ability to bring them together, two rivals, and create a peace agreement was very good.
Yeah, that's impressive. Of course, there's a big issue there. Zhou Bo, of course, the latest had that, China also basically brokered the peace talks between one of the important rebel, a coalition of three armed rebels in Myanmar and the government in southwestern Chinese city of Kunming, the Myanmar peace process over there. I mean, how big an event is that? It's not really, much discussed or reported in the media.
Well, I fully agree to what Tangen has already talked about. That is, actually, with China growing bigger and bigger, he simply cannot hide, anywhere because China itself is so big. So history is remembered by some major events. For example, for Chinese Navy, I would believe historians will recall PLA's sending ships to the Gulf of Aden as a time when Chinese Navy became a blue water navy. And the people definitely will remember China's successful mediation between Iran and Saudi Arabia as a turning point in Chinese diplomacy. So this follow-up in Myanmar is such a natural process. And I believe that this issue, of course, is so complicated because it involves, so many warring parties. But Chinese attitude is sincere in that Myanmar is a direct neighbor of China, and China has all the reasons to hope that Myanmar will become peaceful and stable.
Mm-hmm. Well, later on, we'll also come back to the neighboring area. But Anna, I will ask you about, the foreign ministers talk about, China-U.S. relationship. He mentioned about misconceptions about China continue, and, promises have not, let's say, at least all been met there. So U.S. continue to surprise the Chinese development. Latest development, you can see the remarks from the U.S. Commerce Secretary talking about, no Chinese EVs basically because China can shut down them all of a sudden on the street, things like that. And also there are proposals to force TikTok to become a U.S. business entity there. What's your take of that?
I think the relationship between China and the United States, until now, you can see that it's really being describe or can be described in a sense that there's a lot of challenges, but at the same time, there's also cautious, like, it's like a push and pull kind of situation. But despite this kind of competitive framework that characterize the relationship between the two countries, I think there are a lot of openings for both countries, China and the United States, to cooperate. And some of the issues that they can actually cooperate includes climate change and disease preventions like pandemic. However, it's very obvious that we can see that there are major challenges to the relationship of the two major powers or global powers in the world right now. And again, you have said earlier, it involves these challenges includes, for example, technological competition, and you have the trade kind of barriers being imposed by the United States on China. You have also military tension in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, by which you can see the major global competition in terms of primacy in Asia Pacific region between the two. Though I don't really see China as competing in terms of hegemony or dominance in the Asia Pacific region. But between the two countries, you can also see the difference in approaches to global crisis, especially when you talk about conflict resolution. As you can see, and it's being exemplified by the Ukraine crisis at the moment, how the United States approaches the conflict in terms of resolving it, and how China approaches the Ukraine crisis, by which China is emphasizing that there's such a thing as a political solution or political settlement to the Ukraine crisis, which is very much different with the kind of perception of the United States and how to deal with the Ukraine crisis and other economic disputes that we can actually witness and see at the moment between the relations of the two countries. So if you can see, really, the U.S.-China relationship are very complex. There's an interplay of strategic competition opportunity for limited cooperation. However, the key to navigating this complexity lies in managing tension. I think steering clear or away from escalation of any conflict, for that matter, may be geopolitical or may be economics, but at the same time trying to emphasize or identify mutual interests and areas by which the two countries can cooperate. Because as much as possible, countries in the world would want to see a more cooperative relationship between China and the United States. I think that's the way forward. If you want to have a more constructive or a more harmonious future of our world right now.
Right. Ambassador, you are in the United States. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said peaceful coexistence has always been the bottom line of China-U.S. relationship there. Do you think that Washington also agrees with this point in terms of stabilizing or handling this bilateral relationship here?
Well, I will say this. The year 2023 gave us a good opportunity to examine the evolution of this relationship. I must say the year didn't start very well with the formation of the Special Committee on China at the U.S. House of Representatives, and then with the balloon incident. So really didn't get off to a very good start. But I will say that over the course of the year, a number of positive developments took place. We had the visit of a number of high-level cabinet secretaries from the United States to China, Secretary Blinken, Secretary of the Treasury Yellen, Mr. John Kerry, Secretary of Commerce Raimondo, all visited China in quick succession. We also then, of course, had a meeting between President Biden and President Xi in San Francisco for the APEC meeting. So it seems to me there were some positive developments after a very rough few initial months. I also think what we are seeing, and I'm particularly encouraged by this, I think there is a very fluid conversation between high-level policymakers in China and in the United States. Foreign Minister Wang Yi has met with Secretary Blinken, with National Security Advisor Sullivan on various occasions. And I think that is important. It is important to continue the conversation rather than end up in very different positions that might lead to escalation and to further conflict. So I am moderately optimistic about the evolution of U.S.-China relations in the course of the past year.
Mm-hmm. Anna, what's your take of in what way you would characterize this relationship right now? Of course, is election year in the United States, and also there's I think it's fair to describe that as an anti-China, strong anti-China sentiment, at least in inside the Washington Beltway there?
Well, there's a competition to see who is more anti-China, so it's not a rational discussion. It's just merely, it's easier to get votes by pushing fear than it is by pushing hope. And I ran elections, I know that. I tried to stay away from it, but it is a reality in that particular venue. I'm going to disagree a little bit with Anna on this. The problem with the United States is American exceptionalism. It's this idea that we're right, you're wrong. Because you can't negotiate with somebody when, you're right and they're wrong. I mean, by definition, they should just follow you. So while the U.S. Pays a lot of lip service to, different issues, and they say, oh, yes, we believe in the one China policy, as Wang Yi pointed out, their actions don't follow that. And we saw that also in Europe with this situation in Ukraine, where you had two leaders, Merkel and Hollande, both admitting afterwards that although they had signed off on a peace process, they had no intention of following it through. And this is why it gets back to my original point. There's a trust deficit out there. And in order for that to be erased, China has to figure out how it can deal with the U.S. It's kind of like what they call the prisoner's dilemma. How do you deal with somebody who's trying to be an overlord and is, in essence, threatening you with physical violence? So it is very difficult. There have been positive sides in terms of just talking, which is better than not talking, but sincerity and trust are going to be big issues going into the future.
Zhou Bo, I have to have your opinion here. Of course, when people in the international arena, when they talk about China-U.S., the people tend to say, geopolitical competition here. From Chinese point of view, people would ask, what we are competing for with the U.S. is really, like kind of a competition imposed on China by Washington. And what's your take on that?
Yes, I must admit that there is an element of competition here between China and the U.S., and this is also natural, between countries, especially between two major powers. But I think China differs, first of all, in culture, because Chinese people definitely believe more in cooperation rather than in competition. When you talk about cooperation, it feels nice, right? It will make people feel relaxed. And if you talk about a competition, people feel tense. And if, for example, when we hear from President Biden that this kind of relationship is one of extreme competition, then people might ask, how far then is it away from a conflict? Yeah? So my best hope is that this relationship is one in which cooperation might prevail over competition. But if we can't, then do not let competition slide into confrontation. And I believe that we do have a common ground in not sliding into a conflict. But then the question is, what shall we do? Yeah? So shall we have more confidence building measures, or what Americans call the guardrails? Then about the guardrails, it is difficult in that the military balance between China and the United States is not equal. But on the whole, international thing, the Chinese military is much weaker than the United States. But it doesn't matter, because what we care about is about sovereignty and territorial integrity. That means it is in the Western Pacific, where the Chinese military is progressing by leaps and bounds. So unless there is a war, nobody knows who actually is stronger. But of course, it is our joint good wish that we should never come into conflict.
West specific, of course, one of the key issues between China and the U.S. is the Taiwan question here. Are we seeing any change of Chinese policy? In the international arena, there's a lot of talk. China is giving up on peaceful reunification or whatever. Do you see any change on the Taiwan question, the policy, or what about the increase of the defense expenditure? Is there a dramatic, increase, or does that indicate any, a potential significant move from the Chinese side? Zhou Bo?
Well, I think you have asked the most important question. And I think right now, Chinese government is still talking about peaceful reunification. And I do believe peaceful reunification is still possible. Why? The reason is very simple. This world is becoming smaller because of globalization. And the mainland China certainly would have more interactions with Taiwan and with the rest of the world. So long as this kind of mutual integration is going on, it's just a question of time when the two parts will merge into one another. Let me give you an example. Before COVID, reportedly 1.5 million Taiwanese are living in mainland China. Most of them live near Shanghai. What does that mean? That means so long as these people can find better opportunities to make money, so they would not care too much about living in a society with a totally different social system, right? And at the same time, the mainland is giving Taiwanese more and more preferential treatment, especially in the Fujian province, where the Taiwanese may just have a local card like any other Chinese, and the children go to kindergarten. And we're even talking about provide water, electricity, and even a bridge linking, Fujian to Kinmen, for example. Yeah. So all these efforts will work, although it takes time. But I'm confident that eventually we'll become members of a big family through peaceful means.
Peace and security. And of course, this, but the South China Sea is another issue, not only between countries in this region, but also we have the, I would say, a big role of the U.S. When it comes to relationship between China, ASEAN countries, all the disputes, among the different countries there, including the Philippines there. Where are we now? People would ask why Philippines is a country, from the ASEAN countries now having this very visible, disputes between the two countries.
I think in this, I think the South China Sea issue is a very critical area, no, or a critical issue, especially in the ASEAN region, even the wider Asia Pacific region. As to your question, if where we are now, especially between the Philippines and China, as you can see, there's still this kind of tension between the two countries. And I think the political relationship of the two countries is deteriorating. I'll be very frank about it. Because, as you can see, the Philippines is very much assertive of its claim in the South China Sea, especially in the second Thomas Shoal and the Scarborough Shoal. But of course, it's very understandable that China will protect its interests and its claim in the South China Sea. So you can see that there is a clash. There's really a clash. And the relationship of the two countries are, deteriorating. But at the end of the day, the South China Sea is not just an issue between China and the Philippines. And there are other claimant states involved. You have Malaysia, you have Brunei and others, and even Vietnam is there. And I think all of these players has something to say on the issue. And I still believe that as long as the two as long as there's some kind of military outbreak in the South China Sea, and even though there are skirmishes, still, the people of the two countries understand that the only way to resolve the issue and the only way to de-escalate tension is for the two countries to talk it out. If there is a political settlement that China is proposing in the Ukraine crisis, in the South China Sea issue, there's also a political settlement to that. And that's what you call negotiation, resolving the dispute peacefully. And I really hope the code of conduct in the South China Sea will be pushed forward by all claimant states, including my country, the Philippines, and of course by ASEAN. Because without the code of conduct, this kind of skirmishes in the South China Sea will always be there every now and then, precisely because the area is disputed. And countries are navigating how to behave in the South China Sea. And of course, they are very assertive of whatever claims they have, like the Philippines. So I really am hoping that the code of conduct in the South China Sea will in any case be pushed forward by all parties concerned. And of course, the ASEAN and China, of course, is very much into it. And I hope that, tension will de-escalate, because it's not good for my country and China to have this kind of, it's not a World War III, but it's a words. There's exchanges of words. It's like world war of words. As you can see, both sides, there are press statements coming from my country. There's a press statement coming from China. It's but understandable. They're defending their position. But I really hope that this tension will de-escalate anytime soon.
Yeah, we need to talk to each other more, probably.
Yes.
On the different front, on the European front, we have Foreign Minister Wang Yi extending this visa-free treatment ambassador to 6 more European countries, Switzerland, Ireland, Hungary, Austria, Belgium, and Luxembourg. So this is, of course, based on the step previously, such treatment granted to the citizens from like France, like Germany, Italy, Spain, etc. there. So what's the consideration, and how will that be received?
Well, I think it's a positive thing. I myself think that visas are a great impediment to travel and for people to get around the world. So everything that has to do with eliminating visas, eliminating these requirements is a good thing. I think people-to-people exchanges are extremely important. I think the more people get to know China from the rest of the world, the more they will get to appreciate what is happening in China. So I think this is a positive development. Tourism is, of course, a very important economic driver in today's world. So I'm all in favor of eliminating barriers to travel, to tourism. I think China is moving in the right direction. I hope this has a positive effect on Europeans traveling to China, and I would like to see more of that.
Well, Anna, Minister Wang also said, cooperation should be a defining feature of China-Europe relations. But of course, that means it's not that case, right? And said a strong China is in Europe's fundamental interests. And of course, a strong China should also serve the interests of the Europeans. And both should be the defenders of multilateralism. As long as China and Europe have a mutually beneficial cooperation, there will be no bloc confrontation. Europe, do you think Europe thinks in a similar way, or they are still thinking of Ukraine, what kind of a role China should play?
Well, I think Ukraine is one of the top issues, but that is about to change. I think Donald Trump will be bigger than Ukraine in the long run. If he does follow through with what he says in terms of the Grand Alliance, junking it, also maybe withdrawing from NATO, raising tariffs on European goods, Europe is going to have to make a decision about where it wants to trade. In terms of markets, China is the largest market out there. There are obviously synergies between these two areas. It would solve a lot of problems. But the issue, of course, is this kind of fundamental belief that somehow China is responsible for getting Russia out of Ukraine, which unfortunately is not very realistic at any level. This idea that you're going to pressure Russia and it's going to accede to your demands. Well, if that were true, Russia's economy would not be at 3.5% and Europe's at 0.7%.
Well, that's true. Zhou Bo, stay with this topic. Of course, the European side, often if you talk to them, they would expect China to play such a role as described by Anna, like, if China says something to Putin and then, the Russians' policy will change, Russia will withdraw forces from Ukraine. And people probably also expect the United States to do the same with Israel. And then Gaza war will be done, will be finished there. But overall, the Europeans are also de-risking from China. Basically, de-risking, you can say, the result is distancing themselves from China. So what's the response from China? How do you characterize the Chinese policy toward European countries here?
With all what you said as background, I think my answer is very simple. Europe will improve its relationship with China because this has already happened, and this speed will simply, become faster. With or without this Ukraine issue to be resolved. Why? Because, you see, actually, Trump has said something that he could have, finish the war in 24 hours. That, of course, is bragging, but that tells another truth. The actual negotiation would be between Washington and Moscow. It's not between Kiev and Moscow. So the United States is holding the key. Yeah, China has made proposals, but China's proposal would not work if no one wants to come to a ceasefire first. So right now, I don't see a ceasefire there, but I don't believe a war will last forever. Trump's potential re-election might be a potential game changer, but it won't change the fact that Russia now is having the upper hand, and Ukraine's counterattack has already failed. So what lies in the future is very much clear. So this doesn't look rosy for Ukraine. So things have to be negotiated on this basis. I'm sorry to say that, but that looks like a fact.
Mm-hmm. Well, aside from Ukraine, I mean, aside from probably China and Europe, if you look at the absolute majority of the international community, ambassador, in particular the Global South, they have similar positions on Ukraine. And also we do see a rise of a Global South, probably, or some others would put it like the rise of the rest, with the BRICS countries' expansion, for example. How do you see this rise of the Global South? So what kind of impact they are going to have on, say, global order, for example?
Yes, I think that's a very important question, and you have hit the nail on the head. I think one of the most significant developments that has taken place in international affairs in the past 2 years is precisely the rise of the Global South. We have seen that in the reaction of many countries in Africa and Asia on the war in Ukraine. We've seen it with BRICS expansion, as you quite rightly point out. We've seen it with the reaction almost unanimous across the Global South on the war in Gaza. All of these things point out to a very important phenomenon, and that is that countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America think that the current international order is not responding to their needs. They want different arrangements, and they are saying that what we have right now is not working. And you can see that in the initiatives also of individual countries. Brazil, for example, while chairing the United Nations Security Council, brought forth a resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza, resolution that was vetoed by the United States. But the fact that Brazil took that initiative tells you something. South Africa took the lead in bringing a case to the International Court of Justice on stopping the carnage that is taking place in Gaza, where 10 times more children have been killed in 5 months than all of 2 years of the war in Ukraine. So what we are seeing is something very significant, which is that the countries in the developing world, in the Global South, are taking very different positions from those that the West is taking. And in that sense, it seems to me, we, with my colleagues, have emphasized the notion of active non-alignment as the way forward. And we're seeing a true revival of the notion of non-alignment, albeit now in a new incarnation, as what we have called active non-alignment. So I think that is a very significant phenomenon that we have to take into consideration.
Mm-hmm. Like 1 minute, Einar, do you agree? You do see this, the rise of the Global South, and also they are impacting the global order, and maybe gradual but firm, and take into consideration of what recently has been announced by Joseph Borrell, basically said that the period of Western domination has ended. What do you make of that, the change here?
Yeah, the rise of the
Yes,
rest
I think I
is-
agree.
Sorry, Anna,
sorry.
in the studio.
The rise of the rest is, well documented. Jorge talked about it. What is most frightening to Washington is the idea that the resources controlled by the rest of the world, that they come together, kind of like OPEC does, on different industries, and that they, instead of asking for money that never comes for climate change, instead they start pricing their needs into the prices of the raw materials that they're supplying to the rest of the world.
Well, thank you all for joining us today for Dialogue. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Again, many thanks to our guests. You can also follow us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.